Hi class, in this screencast I'd like to take some time to walk through some sample thesis claims and maps with you. Hopefully before you've started this screencast you've taken a few minutes to look at the sample thesis claims and map document that I've included in week 11 in the content area. If you haven't done that yet, please do that. I think it will help you to look at that information before we actually walk through it here. So if you have done that, let's just take a look at each of these thesis claims and talk a little bit about where the specific thesis is located and where would you expect the paper to go based on what the thesis is saying. So here's the first one. These are all purely hypothetical. These didn't come from real papers. These are just things I made up so I could illustrate to you various different ways that students may go about writing this paper. And so I could envision a paper that starts something like this. We are approaching the Christmas season, the time of year when the guilt really sinks in. This is the time of year when I casually brush past the Salvation Army volunteer collecting change outside of Target so that I can head to the toy aisle and drop $179 on a Barbie dream house for my daughter. I suppose, like many Americans, I assume that splurging on myself and my family is key to achieving the good life, and yet current research would prove me wrong. If I truly wanted to be happy, I would need to recognize that everyone deserves to live the good life, and I would flourish more if I could play a larger role in helping more people to achieve it. Okay, so this is sort of accomplishing a few things. I think at the beginning here, the writer's trying to draw the reader in, maybe using a little bit of a personal voice. The writer has chosen here to put herself as the main character, so she's not saying to the reader, you should really feel guilty when you go to Target and you don't donate something to the Salvation Army volunteer. This person's saying, I feel guilty. It's a rhetorical device, maybe a way to shut down the defensiveness or the defenses of a reader and to draw them into what the argument's going to be. And so there's a lot of I in the beginning here, and that's okay. So it's kind of casual, and it's meant to draw the reader in. And then this is where we actually start to get to the substance of what the paper is going to be about. So the person says, I suppose, like many Americans, I assume that splurging on myself and my family is the key to achieving the good life. So this is kind of like the before and after. This is what the writer used to think, but now that they're writing the paper, they've done the research, the writer says, and yet current research would prove me wrong. If I truly wanted to be happy, I would need to recognize that everyone deserves to live the good life, and I would flourish more if I could play a larger role in helping more people achieve it. Okay, so this is really the setup for the rest of the paper here. This is what cues readers in as to what the paper is going to be about. So I might even ask you, based on this sentence alone, what would you expect from this paper, these two sentences? What would you expect the person to show you? Well, first of all, since it says current research would prove me wrong, as a reader, I would want to see that. I would want to say, well, hey, maybe I'm someone who thinks that buying a Barbie dream house is going to bring me happiness. So show me what the current research is saying. I'm suddenly curious as a reader. So then here's the thesis. If I truly wanted to be happy, I would need to recognize that everyone deserves to live the good life, and I would flourish more if I could play a larger role in helping more people to achieve it. So if we could break these things down, this thesis down, what you would see is there's 2 points in it. The overall point is that if I wanted to be happy, I'd have to do a couple of things that I might not ordinarily do. One of them is recognize that everyone deserves to live the good life. Okay? So that's one. And then number 2 is recognize that I would be happier if I could help more people achieve it. So this sounds like a very utilitarian driven argument. This isn't someone who's talking about, meeting their own needs or low-level pleasures or anything. This is someone who's saying, I think I would be happier. So this is interesting. It's utilitarianism, but it's also maybe driven by egoism, because this person's saying, I would be happier if I could recognize that other people are just like me and that they deserve to flourish too. And then this part, if I could play a larger role in helping more people to achieve it. This is still a little bit vague. I think we would need to know specifically in the paper what this writer's talking about. Maybe what they mean is that they need to give more time, talent, money to other causes. Maybe that's what the person's talking about. So this is a little bit vague, but I think it sets the paper up to take on two things. First, to talk about this utilitarian argument that everybody deserves the good life, and then secondly, to talk about how it is that my life could be better if I were to play a larger role in helping people to achieve it. And so that's just an example of how one type of thesis and one map, this is essentially the map right here. The map is what lets the readers know where you're going, where your paper's going. So that's just one example. Let's take a look at the next example. This one says, we've all heard the saying, you only live once, and some of us like to use this phrase to justify indulging in carefree pleasures. For example, I'll have the extra large ice cream. What the heck, you only live once. It's not that indulgence is entirely bad, but might there be something more to the good life? According to philosophers like Socrates and Mill, and many modern-day researchers, showing more willpower and thinking about our life's purpose well beyond the moment may lead to more happiness. Okay, so again, this writer has chosen to start a little more personally. This is sort of a casual tone. We've all heard the saying, you only live once. So this is a way of connecting with the reader, of hooking them, of drawing them in, making them say, yeah, I can sort of relate to that, but then providing a contrast. And so what I've tried to do in this example is provide some tension to say, yeah, we all like to indulge. It's not that indulging is entirely bad, but is there more that we should be considering? So this is what people would call a rhetorical question. I'm not really asking this as the writer because I actually know the answer to it, but I'm asking it to get the reader on board and to want to know the answer to the question. And so this is all my setup here for my thesis. And then this is the actual thesis. According to philosophers like Socrates and Mill, and many modern day researchers, showing more willpower and thinking about our life's purpose well beyond the moment may lead to more happiness. Okay, so you can tell how this thesis is also laying out a map for the paper as well. So as a reader, I might expect this writer to talk about what Socrates says and what Mill have to say about things like willpower and about how thinking about things like best interests rather than just in the moment pleasures could really benefit me. But I've also thrown in this phrase here, and many more modern day researchers. So I can't just use Socrates and Mill in my paper because I've alluded to many other modern day researchers. So my readers will probably expect that I back up what Socrates and Mill have said so long ago with what some modern day research is showing. So this is just another example of a different thesis claim and, some ways that another writer might approach it. So this next example comes from me sort of channeling Eric, who likes to play devil's advocate on egoism because egoism is so hard for students to entertain. And so I could see a paper that goes something like this. While we've all been taught that selfishness is wrong, I will argue that sophisticated selfishness is the key to the good life. If a selfish person actually follows what is in their best interest, they will not only lead what others might traditionally consider a moral life, but they will, sorry, got the wrong word here. They will flourish in the long run. The intelligent, selfish person will recognize that delaying instant gratification and making significant sacrifices for others is the key to a good life. And so this is probably what the egoist would say. I think this might be a provocative, interesting paper for readers because, this is true. We've all been taught that selfishness is wrong. And if someone comes across and says, I think sophisticated selfishness is the key to the good life, suddenly it has my interest. I'd say, well, what exactly does that mean? I think the word selfish is probably a little bit provocative, but I'd be interested to know what this means. If a selfish person actually follows what's in their best interest, and best interest is really key to this argument, they will not only lead what others might traditionally consider a moral life, but they will flourish in the long run. So this isn't the selfish, greedy jerk who does, what they want in the moment. This is the person who's recognized what their long-term best interests are, and they're taking steps to achieve that. So the claim right here, the intelligent, selfish person will recognize that delaying instant gratification and making significant sacrifices for others is the key to the good life. So as a reader, I would expect this writer to show me how it is that delaying instant gratification, maybe using the Mischel studies and some other things, and I should say, not or, but and making significant sacrifices. So what research supports these 2 points, right? And then I would want to see how those 2 things actually lead a person to live the good life. And if somebody selfishly wants to lead the good life, well, they're going to have to do these things that aren't very selfish after all. And so that's kind of the direction that this kind of paper would go. I'm going to skip this one for now because we're going to look at it in more detail in a minute. I'm going to jump down to this next one. This one's a little bit different stylistically than the earlier ones that I showed you. This one has a more academic feel to it, and so I just wanted to give you this example as well. So here it goes. In this article, Me, How a Sense of Entitlement Can Wreak Havoc on Happiness, writer Dan Zak points out that our society encourages us to behave in narcissistic and entitled ways. He points to cultural evidence like toddler clothing that reads spoiled brat as if this were something to brag about, and to adults who simply cannot wait for anything anymore. But is this culture of entitlement and instant gratification leading us to greater happiness? Zach's article, as well as other research, backs up what some philosophers have been saying for centuries, that the key to happiness is not appetite or pleasure. Rather, it's exemplified by such qualities as patience, gratefulness, and giving. Okay, so this is really saying a lot of the similar things that some of the earlier claims were saying, but it sets up the paper much differently. It's using one of the articles that we read as a launching point for the rest of the paper. And that's completely fine. You can do that too. That's just another great way to start a paper. If there's a particular essay or piece that we've read that you want to use as a launching point that you think sets the stage for what you want to write about, then I think that would be awesome. Using the rhetorical question device again here, is this culture of entitlement and instant gratification leading us to greater happiness? Well, that's essentially Zach's question too. But the person who's writing this paper is going to take it further. So they're going to obviously agree with Zach, but it looks like they're going to bring in some philosophy, what people have been saying for centuries. And they're going to talk specifically about appetite and pleasure, and how happiness is better met through things such as qualities such as patience, gratefulness, and giving. Okay, so let's take a look at this other one, because here I want to show you how to unpack a claim and think about how it translates to your outline. So this is a shorter claim. It's much more upfront and much more concise. The Greeks used the word eudaimonia to refer to the kind of life that leads to human flourishing. In modern times, research has shown that there are actual steps that any person can take that would lead to eudaimonia. Among these are the ability to limit excess and practice patience. So again, we're coming to some of the same points from the other thesis claims, but we're getting there from a different avenue. We're talking about this concept of eudaimonia. So this is a very straightforward intro, but it also provides this map. And there's two things, and as a reader, I would expect from the map to see in the paper. I would expect the writer to address the ability to limit excess and to practice patience. I'm also going to expect that the writer address them in the same exact order that they presented them in their map. So think about it. If you have a thesis map, that's telling the reader, here's where we're going. So if you suddenly take a wrong turn and you address this piece before you address this piece, that's going to be really confusing to your reader. So think about that when you're outlining things. So you'd want to address this first point, ability to limit excess. And when I look back at Unit 3, there are a lot of things that come to mind, I think, when I think about supporting this point. I could talk about Socrates, I could talk about Dan Zach, I could talk about Barry Schwartz, and then I could draw some conclusions about what it means to limit excess and why that is proven to make people flourish or happier. And then with practicing patience, the second point, I might look at the Mischel studies. Maybe I've done some outside research that I could bring in on that, and then I might make some conclusions about this point as well. So this is really basic, really simple, but I just wanted to give you an overview of how it is that your thesis claim sets up what the rest of the paper is going to address. Okay, this is essentially, sometimes we call this intro or this thesis a promise that you make to the reader. It's like you say, this is what I'm going to talk about. And so the reader expects you to follow through on that promise in such a way that by the time they get to the end of your paper, they look back at this and they feel pretty convinced that what you claimed at the beginning of the paper is true. So hopefully this will help you think about how you want to take all of these ideas that you have right now and craft them into some sort of thesis claim that's going to set up your paper, and then what steps you need to take along the way to deliver on that thesis. How do you deliver the promise that your thesis claim sets up? And so this is what you'll be doing this week as you draft your paper again, and I'll be sure to get in there and give you some feedback before the paper's due. Thanks.